Welcome, my fellow fanatical elves. This is the Cleveland Oracle Speaks. Yeah, I changed the title of this show a little bit. I am the Village Elliot. I'm going to tell you about the past, present, and future of the Cleveland Browns. And specifically, I want to talk about the future hiring of an offensive coordinator for the Cleveland Browns. I've got one in mind that'll knock your socks off. As you probably have heard by now, the Browns have decided to go their separate ways from Alex Van Pelt for reasons that nobody really understands completely. I guess it probably has to do with the desire to open up the offense for Deshaun Watson. That makes sense. You know, the Stefanski offense, sort of a run-first offense that sort of chugs along and gets short yardage and beats the brains out of the defense. And I kind of like that, truthfully. It's a cold weather, natural turf-based offense, and it's great for a team that plays in the AFC North like Cleveland does. Two tight ends works just fine. But the Browns have signed Deshaun Watson, and he's going nowhere, fans. A lot of people say that, oh man, maybe we ought to get a new quarterback. Maybe we ought to sign Joe Flacco to a long-term deal. But that's not going to happen. And there are 200 million reasons why that cannot happen. Deshaun Watson is under contract, and the Browns have to pay off that deal. It is a guaranteed deal. Guaranteed means that they cannot get out of it. They are paying Deshaun Watson $64 million. They'll probably restructure it, but that just means they'll pay some of that money later rather than sooner. Deshaun Watson is the quarterback, and they have to figure out the best way to utilize his skills. It doesn't matter whether they're having second thoughts or not. They have to go with plan A. There is no plan B. Deshaun Watson is the first string quarterback of the Cleveland Browns. Let's figure out how to win with Deshaun. So, all right, so who's going to win with Deshaun? Who can help us win with Deshaun? What offensive coordinator might that be? And yeah, I do have a candidate in mind. It's a guy that you may know from his previous association from the Cleveland Browns. And first of all, let me give you a couple hints. He was with the Browns in the beginning of the Baker Mayfield era, and he was not the offensive coordinator. A lot of people may not know that he had much to do with the offense. A lot of people thought it was all Freddie Kitchens that did all of the offensive strategizing and designed all the plays. And that's why they gave Freddie Kitchens the job as the head coach in 2019. But then when they started to play football in 2019, things didn't work as well. So they thought, maybe it wasn't Freddie Kitchens after all. So who could it be? Well, let's find out. Let me just boot this little file up here. And I think it was Kenny Zampese who was the quarterback's coach. And so my message for Deshaun Watson is that I think if he is hired, you will love Ken Zampese. He, by the way, is the son of Ernie Zampese, who was the Bengals offensive coordinator back in the day when they were in the Super Bowl with Ken Anderson and Boomer Esiason. I'm not sure if it was with both of those quarterbacks, but anyway, Ernie Zampese was a really great offensive coordinator, very well respected, and his kid is Ken, who grew up in that football family. He was a player in college. I think he was a receiver and punt returner and stuff. But he has had success with quarterbacks wherever he has gone. And let me take you back to that 2018 season which a lot of Browns fans forget ever happened, but it did happen. What happened with Baker Mayfield? Okay, he had that one spectacular game against the New York Jets where Tyrod Taylor got knocked out of the game. Baker came in and won that game and broke the losing streak. And we all had, the Bud Light case came open. And we all had free beer, and it was great. I remember that game vividly. But in any case, he had that game. He had a couple other impressive games, but he started dragging under Hugh Jackson. The team was losing. The team was going down with Hugh Jackson. He was not improving. And they finally decided to get rid of Hugh Jackson. You will recall, moreover, that the play calling was not Hugh Jackson's responsibility. That was taken away from him and given to Todd Haley, the offensive coordinator. What a stupid idea. It's one thing if the coach wants to give the play calling responsibility to the offensive coordinator, but it's quite another thing if the owner takes that away from the head coach and assigns that to the offensive coordinator so that the offensive coordinator actually has more power than the head coach. That is upside down. That cannot be allowed to happen in any professional team. But okay, anyway, look at the stats. Baker was a big loser for Hugh Jackson, 1-4. He had a modest number of yards in those 5 games. Remember, there's actually 6 games that he was involved in. 1,471 yards. That's not very many. Completion percentage under 60%. 6 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Not so great. His rating of 78.9. That's sort of in Brandon Weeden territory. Okay, he was not a star the first half of the season. He was not. The second half of the season, Greg Williams was the head coach. Greg, by the way, we think of him as a defensive mastermind, or some people will call him a crazy man, a little bit of both. I really think he was a genius in his time. There's also, eccentric coach, kind of wild. And I think that's good for a defensive coordinator. But he behaved much differently as a head coach. I think he was truly professional, very good at his job. I loved him as a head coach. And Baker responded to him, and he had a 5-3 record for Greg Williams. And remember, this is half a season. He had 2,254 yards, so that would be like 4,400 if it was multiply times 2 to get a 16-game season. Completion percentage just under 70%. 19 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Remember, he sets the rookie record for touchdowns in that season. His rating is 106.2. Also, what I didn't show, let's go down to the bottom line, is that, Bob Wiley's crew, he was the offensive line coach. They gave up 33 sacks in the first 8 games. 33 sacks, first 8 games. 5 sacks in the last 8 games. That's ridiculous. They were the league's worst offensive line in terms of sacks the first 8 games. They were the best offensive line in the last 8 games, statistically. That is almost unprecedented. If you made a movie about it, nobody would believe it. But they went from last to first in the course of the season. They stayed healthy the entire year. It was just incredible how well they did. So let's give the offensive line a great deal of credit, but also I think Kenny Zampese deserves a lot of credit. At the time, we all thought, oh, this is Freddie Kitchens. It's this wonderful play calling and his designs of the plays and stuff on offense. But we no longer think that's true because Freddie had a whole season to prove that in 2019, and it didn't work out. One of the first things he did was he fired Kenny Zampese on the grounds that he was a Hugh Jackson loyalist, and things just didn't go well. I think that was small-minded of Freddie to just fire people that were associated with Hugh Jackson and the Bengals regime. He should have kept people who were good at their job. That was dumb. But okay, that's what he did. I'd like to pause for a few minutes. I've been showing people on this show the charity that Miles Garrett is well known for supporting. It's called Water Boys. And what it does is it promotes the development of clean water in impoverished communities around the world. So Miles travels to Africa and to Asia and helps to install clean water facilities where people currently have parasite-infected water supplies, and he helps to clean that up, and that's his cause. So for those who have video, you can see the picture of Miles visiting an African town. And I'll pause 5 seconds or so in real time, and many platforms will pause for commercials that are provided by our sponsors. We're very grateful for their support, very grateful for you fans for listening into our stuff. Also very grateful for those who subscribe. That really helps us a lot. You can subscribe down below for those who have visual. And thank you, Johnny Cleveland, for signing up all the sponsors for our show. And we're back. And let's move on and talk some more about Kenny Zampese and look at his career. In the early days, this is prior to coming to Cleveland, he started with the Eagles in 1998 under Ray Rhodes, and Ray became the head coach of Green Bay in 1999. And so Kenny had the opportunity to work with Brett Favre and Matt Hasselbeck, Hasselback, and I think it also had Aaron Brooks on that team, if I'm not mistaken. And so he got an introduction to what quarterback play was all about. I'm not sure that Brett Favre was actually very much of a textbook type quarterback. But anyway, that was his job as kind of an understudy on the offensive side of the ball. And then from there, he went on to the, at that time, St. Louis Rams in 2000, where he worked with Kurt Warner. Kurt Warner, of course, also, like Brett Favre, eventually entered the Hall of Fame. How about that? And then he stayed with the Rams, I think, for 2000, 2001, 2002. In 2003, he moved over to the Cincinnati Bengals, which is where his dad spent most of his career. And his first job was to scout college quarterbacks and help them make the selection. Although I think really everybody knew that Carson Palmer was the number one guy coming out of college that season. So that's who they picked. And he helped to develop Carson Palmer. He had 1 year, I think, on the bench. I think John Kitna was the starter back then. And then they went to Carson Palmer full time after that. And he had a very successful career with the Bengals that included a Super Bowl. Didn't he go to the Super Bowl one time? I think he did. I think didn't he go to the Super Bowl with Chris Collinsworth and all, or was that before then? Anyway, Carson Palmer was a monstrously good quarterback, and then eventually he rode off into the sunset, and Andy Dalton, a number 2 draft pick, became the starter for the Bengals and had a lot of very good seasons and led the team to the playoffs with Marvin was the coach for the team, Marvin Lewis at that time, and they always made the playoffs, but they never won a playoff game, but they were always a very good team. But Zampese was the quarterback's coach, and eventually he became the offensive coordinator. They fired him in 2017 because the team went 0-2 and didn't score a touchdown, and that's when he became available, and the Browns snapped him up, and he became the quarterback's coach in Cleveland. But It turned out, though, that in 2017, the two teams that the Bengals lost to open the season turned out to have the number 1 and number 2 NFL ranked defenses. So it wasn't like the Bengals were really necessarily getting beat up by weak teams. They were really, truly very strong defenses that season. So I don't know that it was really Kenny Zampese's fault. And I don't know that the Bengals were really all that talented offensively at that point. Since he left the Browns, he caught on with the Washington team after he spent some time with the minor league football teams. I forgot which one it is, but anyway, after that stint, he went to Washington. He got to coach Alex Smith, who of course was a finished product by the time he got to Washington. Did very well, but then got injured. He also had Dwayne Haskins, of course, who had off the field problems. Even though he was a very successful college quarterback at Ohio State, never really made it in the NFL. And we think it was probably because of off the field issues. Washington wound up releasing him. And Taylor Heineke became the starting quarterback and actually put up numbers. Now, he was an undrafted free agent. And to my thinking, getting an undrafted free agent to play reasonable football is really the hallmark of a good quarterback coach, rather than, anybody can get a top quarterback to play well. But when you're working with a backup quarterback material and getting them to play well, that's, I think, even more impressive. So I really felt that his job with Taylor Heineke impresses me as much as working with Baker Mayfield. So kudos for that particular accomplishment. Heineke, is not a starter at this point in time, or at least not an entrenched starter, but he's still playing quarterback in the NFL. And Sam Howell was a 5th-round draft pick in 2022, and he became the starter in 2023. And of course, there was a lot of press hoopla about, oh yeah, we think Sam Howell is the next franchise quarterback. I don't know about that. He did lead the NFL in interceptions, but he still threw for 3,900 yards, which is pretty impressive considering who he played for. The whole Washington football team was just atrocious under Dan Snyder. I don't know that it's a valid test for Sam. I don't know if it's a valid test for anybody that coached there. But Eric Bieniemy, of course, was the offensive coordinator, and everybody likes him as an offensive coordinator. But I think that Zampese deserves some of the credit as well for the progress that Sam Howell did make as a passer. The level of ability that they were able to acquire at the quarterback position, I think, is questionable. And but given that they were working over the years with a 5th-round draft pick and an undrafted free agent, I think they got a lot of mileage out of what they were given. Sam Howell is supposed to be a backup quarterback, not a franchise quarterback. And once that's, once we've got that figured out, then I think Sam Howell is actually pretty impressive. Okay, so that's my case for why I think Kenny Zampese is really an offensive mastermind, why he's very good with quarterbacks. I think that if he worked with Deshaun Watson would probably have a career season with him. I think he would throw for way over 4,000 yards, and I think that Zampese would open up the offense. I think it would be a very good combination, a very good fit. We know Zampese very well from his time at Cleveland the first time around, and I don't think that just because he was associated with Hugh Jackson, I don't think that's a reason to disassociate ourselves from him. I think that's a plus, not a minus. And I think that Freddie Kitchens made a big mistake by firing him just because he coached under Hugh Jackson. I think that was dumb. And I think they ought to give him an interview. And I think that they ought to consider hiring him. I thought he probably is like a top 3 candidate for offensive coordinator. And I hope he gets the job. I think that's the guy that I'd probably hire if it were me. Of course, it's not me. I think they'll look at some other guys. But I think the objective ought to be to maximize the value of the quarterback that they've got all this investment tied up in. They still have something in the range of $200 million over the next 3 years that they're committed to. And there isn't going to be any other quarterback in Cleveland, or if there is, it's going to be like a very small investment guy because Deshaun Watson's not available for one reason or another. But that's the guy that they've committed to. They're not getting out of that commitment, unless there's some legal loophole that they can exploit. That's the guy who's going to be the quarterback for the Cleveland Browns and who they must build around. So I think that's what they need to do, is to transition from the run first offense that they normally had to an offense where they do open it up for Deshaun's style of play. And maybe that means getting the running backs more involved in the passing game, although I think they did a really good job of that in 2023. It was the best job that they've ever done in terms of getting running backs involved in the passing game. We have not done that in the recent past with Baker Mayfield. It started to improve with Jacoby Brissett, and we really saw it take off, I think, in 2023. And maybe with a new offensive coordinator, it could become even more important. A lot depends on to what extent Nick Chubb is able to come back, assuming that he stays with the Browns, and I think that he will. But I think that they will want to use him increasingly as a wide receiver and not just as a running back. I don't know that they're going to want to continue to use him as the so-called workhorse of the running back room. I think it would make more sense if they cut down his number of touches, but try to get more out of each touch so that he might have a lot more pass receptions and fewer carries, and try to get a few big plays each game, but not as many touches as he's had in the past. So that's my take. Kenny Zampese, I think, is the best offensive coordinator that I'm aware of. I hope that he gets the job. And so my fellow fanatical elves, I'll talk to you again very soon. Have a great day, and go Browns.